Okay, this is a video of the game Russo-Turkish War 1877 to 78. It's a part of a system rules. There was a previous war on the Franco-Prussian War, and this has updated some of the series rules. It came in Strategy and Tactics magazine. I'm not sure which number. It's by Joseph Miranda, and it's, I think it came out in the 90s. I'm not sure, I could check that maybe later. So it's a fairly old game, and essentially it's an operational level game. So you see here the map that comes with the game. It's actually in two map sections. You've got a European and Asian part. So the Asian map shows bottom of Russia here, the Caucasian mountains, and then the Ottoman Empire as it stretches down towards Persia here. You can just see off there some off-map boxes, which I'll show you in a minute. So we've got Lake Gotcha there, Lake Van, Lake Urania. So I'm guessing this is, I think this is Iran, isn't it, now? And maybe Afghanistan or that, I'm not sure, I can't remember. But so it sort of roughly joins onto here. So yes, no, maybe this is just Turkey, what we know as of Turkey nowadays. Here is Constantinople, now it's Baghdad. And on the European map, so you have Bulgaria here, you've got Montenegro, Serbia, Bosnia, Romania, and there's the Austro-Hungarian Empire here, and then there's Russia also up here. So this line delineates where Russia ends, and there's another one here through the Carpathians that delineates, and then along the Danube that delineates the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Then all the rest is within the Turkish Ottoman Empire. However, Romania, there's a different coloured dotted line. Is it like a territory within? And Bulgaria is a separate territory, such as Serbia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Romania, and so forth. And that is significant because the game, while it's not a card-driven game, it has elements similar to that, in that you have chit pulls which can determine political adjustments happening within the game. So here are Turkish units and Russian units, and what you see here is a headquarters unit. This is the strength value. The middle is the class. Now P is for professionals, so the class can run from elite to professional to, so there's an elite class unit, to reserve class units, and then all the way down, for example, to this one, which is an irregular unit, so that's like a guerrilla fighter. And then you have the movement value. Then you so you have headquarters, and the headquarters have a headquarters value which determines a number of chits that they can play in a turn. Then you also have fortresses. That's a fortress manned by professional troops. Movement 0, of course. You can get fortresses that aren't quite as strong. Then you have these units are, no, over here we have the Army Corps, so that's 4 strength. These are reservists, so they're not as great as professionals or elites, but better than regulars. So you see the square flag, that makes them an Army Corps. Then the triangular flag makes it a division, and then this is I think a brigade or some such. We have it listed in the wars. Yes, so that's brigade. Now, so those are the units in the game, and you can see that we have these Turkish Headquarters holding areas. Now, all of these play aids came with the game, but I've photocopied them and arranged them a bit more to my liking. So these are the headquarters. So, for example, here we have FAI, which is Faizi, and this represents his box. So on the map, apart from being in the fortress, he also has a division and a brigade, a professional and a regular, with him. And so these are like hidden units until you go into combat. Also, we see the Turkish dead pile. Here's the Russian dead pile. You can see the Turks have been quite decimated. A lot of fortresses have been destroyed. That happens just through bombardment. We're actually just entering the halfway point of the game. So this game is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yes, 11 turns long, and we're on the 5.5 turns. So we're just about to start the Turkish half of the turn. And essentially you've got a kind of like a larger, stronger Russian force trying to steam in to the Turkish regions, and then Turkey falling back, trying to sort of hang on. The game itself comes with, I think, 3 scenarios. So I'm playing this scenario, the opening guns, and we finish at this point. The game can be played all the way February the 2nd, so each turn is 2 weeks, ostensibly, so like half a month. So then there's also the full campaign game, and then there's also, there's 5 scenarios, and there's a Balkan front, Caucasian front. Okay, so you could sort of just use one half of either that map or that map, I guess, for the campaign game, and then struggle for the East scenario as well. So there's quite a lot of it's taking that historical situation, but it's giving you quite a lot of options within it. I don't think it doesn't have so it's all like historical setups. You get it's quite well listed. It has all the setup, the units and their beginning setups listed, so it's based upon historical positions. So there's not kind of like a what if in that sense. But there are what ifs in this sense, in that apart from some designers' notes, you also get pre-mobilization variable events. So these can be used with a campaign game. And you get Turkish options and Russian options, so those could be used as balancing or just like the difference to make the game change from play to play. So the way the game plays is very interesting. Essentially, every turn starts with a mobilized phase, and the Turks, they have a professional mobilization they can roll for, or like levy en masse. So these are all irregulars. They have in the mobilization pool, they have a lot of irregular units that can come on, and you can see they come on in greater numbers than the comparative roll and D6. The Russians only have 1 mobilization table. So you have that mobilization phase, and then you can bring on that unit on a friendly fortification hex, which are these red ones, or in a holding area. Now each side has a holding area, and that's essentially these units are in play, but they're not on the map, and they can come on the map in the appropriate side, or if you have units on here, you can bring them off the map into there, and then the next turn you can bring them to the other front of the war. So that's how you have movement like that. There's also, I'll show you some other units. You have navy units, you have riverine units, and then you have engineer units that can build entrenchments, and also they can help move through mountains. Normally mountains are impassable, but if you have engineer units you can go through them, which did happen here. So this Headquarters Grand Duke Mikhail had some cavalry and an engineering unit, and they actually took this fortification from the Turks and came down through here. The Turks have retaken it back through a sea bombardment from their fleet. But anyway, that's something that can happen. So you have that mobilised, then you have the movement phase. Now, movement is the all-important thing in movement is the march table. So you can have a normal march, you can try for forced march, you can go on railroads, or you can have like naval movement. So friendly railroads could be, you know, all the way along here, or the Russians, for example, they start up here in Russia behind this line, and if they are lucky enough, and in this scenario they actually start with the event Romanian intervention, which means that Romania has actually gone over to their side, and then these railroads are considered friendly, and you can move any distance on a friendly railroad, but only 5 combat factors. And you can see that a corps is 4 combat factors, and a headquarters would, although it has 0 fighting strength, it would count as 1. So you could move a whole corps and a headquarters by train, but no more. But the main point is you roll a die. Now, if you're on normal march, on a 4 to 5, so 50% of the time you get your march movement, so you just spend your movement points as per normal. On a 3, you have impetuous movement and you move towards the nearest enemy. On a B, you go back, so you move back towards the board edge or a friendly fortification. And on a 1, nothing happens. So you see there's a bit of a chance of something that you don't want to happen happening, or nothing happening at all. And on a forced march, again, it's slightly different. The railroad, nothing. So it's only 50% chance that people are going to actually get shunted via rail. And you have to roll that per unit. So even if a headquarters has got a lot of units under it and moves a number of them by rail, some may reach destination, some may not. And similar with the naval movement. So you see, this is simulating the logistical problems both these armies face at this time. So nothing's absolutely certain in the movement. And then after movement you go to the fighting phase, and fighting is a bit different from normal. You have chits, and there's 10 chits, combat chits. Normally the defender will always go first. He'll draw one and follow the instructions in the order listed. So that 80 means that 80% of the defender's strength will be reduced from the attacker. So for example, if the defender was defending with, say, 4 strength points, 80% of them, that's considered 3 combat strength points will be lost by the attacker. Now, if, say, all of these units were attacking, these ones will die last. The 0 strength ones will go last, but this one will lose 3 of its strength points, and you will use one of these chits to indicate that it has 1 strength point left. And obviously when it goes down to 0, it goes into here. Now I think you can reconstitute folks from the dead pile, but you can see we've still got other troops to mobilise. There's actually also even contingency reinforcements, so these fellows could come into play depending upon political chits, and these fellows can come into play, similarly political chits, or for paying for national will. We'll get to those things in a minute. But anyway, so that's how combat works, but you have to check some other things. So, for example, we also have a P here and a CD. Now, the P means that any of the opponent's professional or lower class units will be demoralised, and then CD means that any cavalry on the side that pull this chit will be demoralised, considered blown, so they have been used. So the defender does that chit, and then the attacker will take a chit. So then the attacker might get 50%. So if I have a 1 strength unit, 50% will count as 1 strength loss on my opponent, and so forth. And then reserve and lower, so reserve or irregular units of the defender will be demoralised. That's how combat goes. There's another thing that happens in combat is these are supply trains and these are siege engines. If you have a siege engine and you are attacking a fortification, you can get a result like this, which means second level fortifications, the not so good ones, not the very good ones like this, will be destroyed and other units will be demoralized. Now you can just, if you're just bombarding, you will ignore the rest of the results, or you could count that in as an attack, so it would be a general battle, in which case you would, so if you go against here, this would, well, that's a B, say that was a B2, that would be removed, any other units there would be demoralized, and then 20% of my strength would be taken from them as losses, and then any irregulars would be demoralized again. To demoralize would be a surrender, so any irregular units would surrender to the attacking force, and the rest would just be left demoralized. But if I was doing that as just a bombardment, and so ignoring those other results, then the defender gets no chip pull and I just bombard it, so I might destroy the fortification and demoralise them, nothing else. If I was doing it as a battle, the defender would of course get to pull a chip before me, so I might take quite a lot of losses, etc. before this result would come into play. So it's your choice how you do it, but remember you've got a certain amount of time, that's 2 weeks of bombardments without actually attacking the fortress, so it all depends, choices to be made. So that's essentially how fighting goes. You've got here something that explains all the results, honours of war. So this means that you would take a fortress, but the defender would be able to just retreat without any demoralisation or losses. Counter battery fire. Morale, cavalry charge happens. So that all happens according to the chits. Like I say, there's 10 chits, and after each pull you put them all back. So the defender will take and then put his back, so the attacker might pull the same one the defender pulled. That's how combat works, the basics. Then we move to the rally segment. So any of your units that are demoralised have a chance to rally. We have a rally table for that, so it depends upon the class. If you're elite, you'll rally on a 3 to 6 and so forth. Then we go to the logistics phase, and that essentially is very strict. You can only be 3 hexes from a friendly fortification or a friendly supply train unit, which is either 3 hexes from a fortification or within a friendly rail line. So not here, there's no rail line, so it's going to be quite tenuous. But here, for example, if I could have a rail line here to, say if we were the Greens, we had a green no, that doesn't work because the rail line stops there. But, well, the rail line has to be back to a friendly fortification or edge of the map. So generally your 3 hexes of a friendly fortification or one of those supply trains. There's not that many supply trains. I think the Turks have 2 and the Russians have 2 or 3. So you're not running, although there's no zones of control, you're not sort of suddenly running around the enemy and creating great sweeping manoeuvres. It's not blitzkrieg style of warfare, of course. So you can see the Russians have just been sort of, that they cleared these with Turkish held, they just cleared them one by one, and this last turn just moved into there, and the same here, they were clearing them carefully, and like I said, they had that, which meant that this fellow, when he was in the mountains, was in supply. But then he moved there and was out of supply. Because he's out of supply, he had to roll on the supply table, managed to get forage, which is okay. If they were 0 out of supply, you would eliminate 20% strength and then demoralise the others. So the second demoralisation, they would have I don't know if they would surrender, or I'm not sure, I haven't had that happen yet, but you get the picture. So what that meant was that he needed to move back So he's now adjacent to a supply train here. And then you go to the politics phase. Now this is where I'll talk about national will. So each side has a national will track. National will can go from 0 to 20. If it reaches 0, you've lost the game. If it's between 15 and 20, you have high national will. Between 7 and 14, it's average, and 6 and less is low. If you have high national will, you roll 2 dice. No, that's not true. You roll 1 die. On a 1 to 3, you get a political chit. Low on a 1, and on average on a 1 to 2, you get a political chit. And the chits, I think there's 10 of them. They come out of here. And for example, the Russians at the end of their last turn, they got Balkan problems chit, and they immediately played it. What that means is that Greece has which is off map, has decided to rise up and take the opportunity while Russia is attacking the Ottoman Empire. And so the Turks now have to move, I think it's 6 combat factors worth of units, and that's going to be terrible for them. They've got some here in the holding box, but not so many on the map. You can see with their leaders, that would be half the forces under their leader, their headquarters units, and then they have a few odd ones like this and this and fortresses. So that was devastating for them. The Russians also have ceasefire. If they play this, then no one can attack in their next turn. So that if they played it now, then the Turks cannot attack them, and then the Russians cannot attack the Turks in their next turn, and then after that the Turks can then attack the Russians. So it's the Age of Honour. So if you play a ceasefire chit, it has to be observed. They also have this. So this is a chit which would help the Ottomans, and so they're obviously holding it. They can hold that indefinitely. Some chits can be held, like the Ottomans are holding this. If the Russians had it, then Bulgaria would have gone over to the Russian side, and so all of Bulgaria would be friendly, including so that's up to this line here, including the fortresses and some units there. Well, it doesn't matter now, because really, no, mind you, these are still held in the Ottoman control. But so they're keeping that from the Turks. So you see, you get that kind of thing. Then the Russians also played Persia, which wasn't such a wise idea. Persia came over to their side, but they had a very weak one single unit, and the Turks promptly went over, destroyed the unit, and took Tabriz, which incidentally gave them 1 point of national will, -1 from the Turks. National will also is adjusted in battle, so depending on the strength of your victory, like how many combat factors are lost in the battle, you can gain or lose between 0 and 2 points of national will. Also, the Sultan headquarters is represented, and the Tsar can be brought on by the Russian. If they're in a battle that wins or loses, you get also commensurate effect on national will. So that's how the national will goes up and down. And the other thing that just happened, which has been terrible, there's one of the political will chits, which the Turks in my game have been very unlucky. So even though they started with a high national will, they just weren't getting the chits when the Russians were, and the Russians played a chit which was like an off-map insurrection, and it goes back in the cup, so it could come back again, and it meant if they didn't have 10 units in the holding box, so I guess that represents units in reserve available for other actions, it could have been played on the Russians, but you can see they've got a lot still in reserve, they're sitting pretty. But anyway, that cost between 1 and 6 randomly national will to the Turks, which was I think they lost about 4, which has brought them down quite a lot against the Russians. So you can see the Turks are heading to the ropes quite quickly, and it's going to be difficult to hang on. And I think I'm beginning to find out how they should hang on. For instance, they had, I think, 6 strength points of units in that fortress, which they just lost. Now that meant that they lost a tactical battle, it's called, which is a swing of -1 national will to the Turks and +1 to the Russians. So that's a difference of 2 national will in one fell swoop. If instead they'd only had 1 or 2, I think it's up to 4, if you lose up to 4 combat factors in a battle, that's only a skirmish, and there's no difference, there's no movement of national will. So it's going to pay the Turks in terms of national will to spread their troops out, not try and defend anywhere solidly, but just lose lots of skirmishes and hope to hang on before the end of the scenario. And that might well be their tactic within the grand campaign as well. So I thought it was important because this is because these are mountains, they can't normally be passed unless you have a road or a rail network through. I thought that was an important fortress to hold, because now it's opened up the mountain passes. Otherwise they'd have to go around here, and this terrain costs double to move through. You can see it's slow moving through the rough terrain over there. I thought that was important, and that we could have tried to hold it, but with the combat as it is, you know, it's like it's quite unpredictable, which I think is good in terms of this style warfare. It beholds the Russians to bring in heavy forces to sort of cause lots of losses, potentially lots of losses, but for the Turks it beholds them just to delay. Then one last thing I should say, which makes this game what it is you have, every side has these what do they call them? Operations markers. You get 3 what are called staff, and then 4 others. There's the Russians have stolidity, and the Turks have fanaticism, which is different. Otherwise they all have the same, and essentially what they do is they enable ameliorations or adjustments to well, essentially mostly what you're going to do, because you have 3 staff, and you know that number before, I didn't know what to call it, that's the operations number. That means that this headquarters can play 2 of those operations chits a turn. This headquarter can only play 1. For example, the Sultan can't play any, so operationally not effective. But anyway, the staff ones, they have an array of uses. Okay, this is the political events chits, different happenings, and the operations markers. If you play staff, you can either adjust movement, you can have a look at hidden units, or you can alter combat, bombardment, counter siege, or you can save a unit from being out of supply. So essentially, if you're playing it in movement, then it means you're going to get a movement guaranteed, and each side only has 3 staff markers each. So what that means is that each side has 3 guarantees movements a turn if they want to guarantee that. Otherwise they would use their staff markers to, for example, if you're attacking, you play staff marker and you will get to play a chit before the defender. Normally the defender plays their battle chit first, unless of course they are a headquarters unit, and then and they play a staff marker, and then they can seize the initiative back. So you see the randomness of the movement and the combat can be ameliorated by those staff markers. There's only 3, and you have to decide what to do. There's also, each side has a bold action. So for example, if a bold action can mean you can move again, or you can move even when you couldn't move, or you can adjust combat in your favour, but it's a bold action and there is a chance, a 1 in 6 chance it will end in disaster instead. But what this means is that, say this headquarters unit, who is Nepokojitsky, he's operationally quite good, but if he plays staff so sort of to certify his movement, so all his units will definitely move, then he could play, say, a bold action or another staff in the combat. But then after that, if if this unit plays a bold action or a staff against him, he won't be able to reply because he's spent his 2 operations. There's also another thing, Sedition. This is very handy, and it means you can place a guerrilla unit within 10 hexes of your headquarters. Now there is a reply that the other side has, where is it? Secret police. That will cancel a Sedition unit, and but that's only within 5 hexes. So you have to, you see, there's balancing, but it's not just immediate tit for tat. So that's essentially how the game plays. You've got the basis is that unpredictability of movement and the large variability in the combat, but then within and the slow operational tempo. It's slow because units won't always move when you want them to, and also slow because the terrain and the necessity of your logistical train being tight and aligned along fortifications, so you're not sort of running around in the wilderness in this game. You can, but you won't last long, so that would be done carefully. Like this unit is actually Turkish, and if it doesn't move, it's been lucky so far in foraging, but sooner or later it's going to wither on the vine, that irregular unit there. So within that, then you have, so you've got the battle markers, you've got the political events, and you have the operationals chits. So the political events are completely random, but frequent enough, that both sides have a chance of affecting interesting events. And then the operations chits are completely selective. It's your choice, and it makes for what I'm finding a very interesting game. So that's enough of describing the game. I'm going to stop this video now, and then I'm going to just run a short one of the Turkish half of the next turn in case anyone's interested to see how it plays out in real time.